It's wonderful to be with you all and to have this opportunity to share a reflection on this passage. I will say I signed up to offer the homily for noonday prayer primarily based on my schedule, when I'd be available. There's some Tuesdays I'm not available. So I signed up because I was available this Tuesday. And let's just say it was an even added bonus that we have such a banger of a story to reflect upon for this homily, where this story is in many ways the centerpiece of the Exodus. You don't get much more dramatic in this, tailor-made for the movie treatment. I know every time I hear this story at the Easter Vigil, I think of Charlton Heston and the Ten Commandments. There's this culmination of the whole series of events God set in motion when God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. The 10 plagues on Egypt, the repeated hardening of Pharaoh's heart, the slaughter of the firstborn, the establishment of Passover. After all that, after all the Israelites have been through, this story we hear today finds them at their most vulnerable, trapped and cornered with Pharaoh's army closing in. When I think of this scene, I can't help but think of Moses. And I can't help but think back to when God first approached Moses as a voice out of a burning bush, when God first told Moses what God was up to. When God tells Moses, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what I want you to do. Moses understandably says back in chapter 3 of Exodus, God, that's kind of a big ask. When I go and tell Pharaoh, when I go tell all these people, all these crazy things, can you give me a sign to reassure me and reassure the people? And God says, great idea, Moses. I'll give you a sign. The sign is this. When you've done everything I've told you to do, you'll worship me here where you're currently standing. And I always imagine Moses thinking, God, do you know what a sign actually is? How am I supposed to go and encourage people with that kind of a sign? You'll know you'll be able to do these things when you've done these things. Yet there they are, cornered, about to die. And I imagine Moses saying to himself, God, maybe you could have told me everything that this job entailed, so I could have made an informed decision about whether I wanted to do this. But when I think about that, I think what if God had really told Moses out of the burning bush all the bonkers stuff that's going to happen? Yeah, you're going to cast your staff down. It's going to turn into a snake. It's going to eat all these other snakes. You're going to have to put lamb's blood on the door, or else this angel's going to kill you. Would Moses have done it if God had told him all the things were going to happen? Moses already tries to get out of it. And he doesn't really, he's like, no, I'm not a really good speaker. I got this flock to take care of. Moses tries to get out of this without knowing what's going to happen. Imagine what his response would have been if God did tell him what was going to happen. I think back, when I think of that voice out of the burning bush, I think back, honestly, on some of the most significant and important parts of my life. And to be honest, I'm really thankful I didn't know some of the things that were going to happen to me in this life. Would I have done them? There's no way anybody can tell you all the things you will do as a parent. Just to give one example. I sometimes wonder, would I have become a parent if I knew the heartbreak that can come with it? Yet in order to really, genuinely, honestly, truly follow God, that's going to put us in some places we might rather not be. I've never been cornered by an Egyptian army. But I have walked into a room and told someone they're going to die. I've told my son his parents are getting divorced. I could go on. And so, I gather, could everyone here. But times in your own lives where you were put in places you'd rather not be, called to do things you'd rather not do. The key part in the story for me at the Red Sea is how Moses acts. The people are terrified. I gotta say, understandably, I got a lot of sympathy for them. As they call out to Moses and to God, why did you bring us out here? Aren't there enough graves in Egypt? But the people despair, but Moses does not. His response is, do not be afraid. See the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. I think this is in part because Moses has remembered all the things God has already done. God did turn his staff into a snake that ate up all of Pharaoh's magician snakes. He'd sent frogs and boils and all sorts of things onto the Egyptians. He had destroyed the firstborn of all the Egyptians, but spared the Hebrews. God did all of those things, some of which just happened a day or two before. This is an ancient history. So if God remembered and did all those things, then God can do this. In fact, that's the only reason they're there at the Red Sea, because God remembered. Back in chapter 3, God said to Moses, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. God has remembered the promise and the covenant God had made with Abraham and Abraham's descendants. God has seen the suffering of his people. God says, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I've heard their cry. I know their sufferings. God remembers, and God knows, and that's why they're there. That's why Moses doesn't despair like the people do. He remembers what God has done. As I thought about the stories, I thought about how we remember the God who stands with us in this life, the God who stood with Moses at the Red Sea, the God who stood with each and every one of us. All of us wouldn't be here on this call if God had not brought us to this place. As I think about that, I think about a famous exchange between Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth. In the 1850s, both were speaking at an abolitionist anti-slavery gathering, and it was a hard, bleak, dark time. In the 1850s, progress in abolition seemed to be going backwards. The Fugitive Slave Act had nationalized slavery. U.S. Marshals were authorized to kidnap African Americans and rendition them back to the South. Kansas had devolved into a bloody guerrilla war between pro and anti-slavery factions. Douglass, in his speech to that group, lamented, wondering whether slavery would ever be abolished in the USA. He sat down, Sojourner Truth stood up, looked at him, and said, quite simply, Frederick, is God dead? There was a kind of stunned silence, and believe me, it's hard to stun Frederick Douglass into silence. But there was a stunned silence, and Sojourner Truth went on. Yes, times are difficult. But she says, doing difficult things involves hard times. You can't do something difficult and not expect there to be hard times along the way. But in the midst of that, the God who had brought both Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth out of slavery and onto that stage was still God. The God who had brought them to that place was not going to abandon them now. If God is not dead, the good news is God is with us. And those words, is God dead, are inscribed on Sojourner Truth's tombstone in Battle Creek, Michigan. The woman born enslaved became one of the most prominent activists for abolition and women's rights and temperance, and lived to be 103. As we continue on this Lenten journey, as we are confronted daily, hourly, it seems, by the brokenness and sin and suffering in our world, in our church, even in our own lives. When we will hear these words at the Easter Vigil in a few weeks, may we know, like those Israelites, may we know, like Moses, God remembers. God is not dead. And may we remember in those times in our lives when it may feel that way, may we remember Moses' words here. Do not be afraid. See the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you. Amen.